Now?
There we
You are
go.
live.
I think we're live.
Live.
So welcome everyone to
This dark and stormy night.
It is definitely a stormy, wet day out there, and wet night out there, rather, which is very atmospheric. Anime is often atmospheric. So we're definitely catching that vibe, which is a lot of fun. And today we're going to be talking about a stormy topic, a controversial topic. Or
Master Chief Snake is here.
Very good. People
what is
don't
our
like
topic?
talking about this. We're going to be talking about the question of Hayao Miyazaki and whether he was bad for anime, or at least not great for anime. Which might seem rather
How could
controversial.
he be bad for anime?
Exactly. Well,
This
that's what
guy
people
is
ask.
anime. Well, many people's first introduction to it.
That is true. And that might be the problem right there. So let's talk a bit about that and the various issues therein. And first, we should probably introduce Miyazaki. And
Who's this Miyazaki guy?
exactly. And what are we talking about here? So Hayao Miyazaki is arguably the best known Japanese animation director in the world. Directed a large number of anime films, and half a dozen of them. Actually, more than that, 8 or 9. And so he's done, let's see, gosh, Nausicaa, the Valley of Wind, Castle in the Sky, Kiki's Delivery Service, My Neighbor Totoro, Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, which was very well known over here in America, and most recently The Wind Rises. Now, because his films went international and they're known throughout the world, for a lot of people, that's what people think anime is. Or it's how they're introduced to anime.
Miyazaki films. Oh, anime, yeah.
Right. And you hear that a lot. You talk to people about anime, they say, oh, Spirited Away, right? Or whatever. But here's the problem. His films aren't very much like anime.
How are they not like anime?
Well, they have a lot of full character animation, a lot of very smooth character animation. And they are generally high budget. They have very distinctive themes, obviously, around fantastical elements and environment and things along those lines. And his films also generally tend to have some kind of social message. But also,
that is kind of un-anime-like. I've seen a little bit more choppy and not as much of a direct message in anime, but his definitely have a message.
His definitely have a message. And it's also interesting, someone was talking about this just today, about one of the disadvantages of Hayao Miyazaki's approach is that he tends to homogenize animation. One thing you'll see a lot of in even, especially modern animation, is you'll have choppy or uneven or simple animation that will then break through into this really high quality, really over the top, crazy, cool animation. Kill la Kill is a great example of this.
Yeah.
Just things go nuts. Miyazaki doesn't do that. His movies look the same all the way through in terms of animation, very even quality. So you don't get that vigor that you get in a lot of what's called sakuga anime, where it's this sakuga. It's this aggressive key animation of these very carefully animated sequences. So his films have this kind of simplicity to the animation, which means that people don't look for, they don't even know that anime has this wonderful kinetic animation in these TV shows. Naruto will have these great fight scenes, kind of out of nowhere, and people don't know that those exist, which is kind of a problem.
How can anybody not know that exists?
And that's the thing, because Miyazaki has been kind of the front runner, right, for people being introduced to anime, that means they have these preconceptions about what anime is.
Oh, so they think all animes like the anime that I saw, which was Miyazaki, because he was the front runner.
And then worse, they'll watch an episode of Pokemon or the beginning of an episode of Naruto, for example, and they see this very simple animation or this stylized animation, and they assume that the entire show's like that because that's what a Miyazaki movie is like. It's all the same. So this comes to that question of, has Miyazaki's influence been a problem?
Well, Sakuga? Sakuga. How long has Sakuga style been utilized?
Over decades.
Is that a budgetary or stylistic or?
I mean, you could argue it goes back to the 80s and to shows like Macross, which had this idea of suddenly being able to pour money and animation into individual action sequences, which were really, really cool.
So over time,
that
sort of developed.
Exactly. Well,
because action, you have to have more animation, but when two characters are talking, you can easily go to an abstract background, low animation, very simple style. But Miyazaki doesn't seem to do that. He's got backgrounds that are moving
and he comes from the 60s and 70s when you made like those classic fairy tale anime TV series, the Anne of Green Gables, or not just fairy tales, but and which had this very stable animation style all throughout. If you watch those whole shows, and it's very simple, very, very simple in the best sense. And so from his perspective, that's how you do animation. Animation should look that way. And to be fair, one of the writing principles of animation is that if every shot looks different, the brain gets overloaded. There has to be consistency at some level. But what anime staff have evolved to over time is this idea that they all know how to draw the characters the same, but they can bring their own animation quirks to it.
Animation quirks.
So one person might be great at three-dimensionality of characters and spinning around characters and seeing them from multiple angles. Others may be great at spinning characters that are flying through air, these strange
punch
exactly.
The ballet of
there's a great
fight scene.
I'm forgetting the name of him, but there's an animator who characters will move so much that they'll kind of noodle into these like weird spinning shapes as they're kind of spinning through the air. It's really neat. But you take a screenshot of any of these and you'll recognize the characters. It's not inconsistent on that level. It's just these visual
style of motion.
Style of motion, exactly.
Style of motion.
And style of representation of sort of character art and so forth. I mean, kind of how their bodies move through space. So yeah, this is the thing, and again, because anime has such low budgets, relatively speaking, this is the only way to stylize things. Because you're going to have those simple conversational shots.
Save the budget for that action fight scene, and that's what everybody will remember from this. That cool fight scene.
Totally.
We're not going to remember that your background while two characters were talking was very detailed and motion filled as much as the fight scene. And if the fight scene loses its quality due to that money being put into the less boring. But Miyazaki is his consistent attention to detail in every shot. That does seem sort of different than the standard anime.
Is the plural of anime? No. But yeah, and so it creates this expectation. And again, and this is not saying that Miyazaki is wrong for doing that. That's just his style and his approach. But because of his standing, it's an issue.
But would it would still be considered anime?
Would it? Depends on who you ask. I mean, anime as an animation approach certainly is not matched by the way Miyazaki does his work. If you think about anime as from a technical perspective, as animation, he doesn't follow any of those things. And he himself, as we said before, he himself does not consider his work to be anime. To him, anime is cheap television animation that doesn't have a budget and is aggressively stylized, whereas he does more Disney style, very consistent animation all the way throughout. Now, to some extent, that's splitting hairs. I would consider Miyazaki stuff to be technically anime. I think most people would. But whether or not it technically is, everyone lumps them together. So we live in a world where they are considered the same.
Well, I haven't seen as much of the common shorthand of anime in Miyazaki's.
Oh no, he does not do that.
So that's a very anime characteristic thing, the sweat drop, the star on the head, the dramatic point. So from that perspective, I could see how people would put him on the fringe of anime, still being anime, being from Japan, stylistically a little bit less than the standard anime. That really brings a new perspective to this.
Yeah, it's tough. There are a lot of aspects to that. I mean, it's like so many things. It's often pointless to get into the question of whose fault is something. It's often nobody's fault. It just kind of is. Miyazaki, for many different reasons, and as a result of many different things, is this sort of forerunner of anime, or this public knowledge, that this thing that everyone points to as anime. But with that reality comes this question of, when people expect that and then they watch anime and see that it's not like that, what effect does that have? How might anime have been different if Miyazaki wasn't what people thought of when they thought of anime? I mean, my concern is that, he's created these expectations, and one of the reasons that anime hasn't taken off in America as much as it might have is that folks come into anime with those misconceptions and then reject it because it doesn't follow what they expect. I mean, we've certainly seen the widespread acknowledgement of anime. Pretty much everyone knows what anime is, but very few people go on from there to actually watch much anime. And I wonder, is that because of where anime of Miyazaki's influence?
Well, here's an idea. Is anime a shorthand for saying animation?
Well, so that's a thing.
That's a good question, because in the early days, Japanese animation was termed Japanimation, and that's almost pejorative in some circles, but it was a common term in the earlier days of Japanese animation coming to the US.
And it's a good example of how terms get appropriated. In Japan, anime is a term for animation. Anime just means animation.
In Japan, does that qualify Disney movies as anime?
Yes, Disney is.
So everybody out there who's complaining, that's not anime, that's US animation. Well, in Japan, that's anime.
Right. But like so many things, when the term came back over to America, we use the word differently. So over here, we consider anime to be Japanese animation in that particular stylistic sense. So
usage.
Yeah, exactly, usage. In the way we're using it here, we're talking about that particular stylistic thing.
Similar concept.
Yeah, and as Death Cannon says, I think it was, or as Liquidus is saying, that hentai is used differently in different contexts, so it's definitely different. So it's a weird thing. The other thing that doesn't help is Miyazaki's comments over time about anime and about the anime industry and so forth.
Now, what would some of those include that were less than?
Well,
is he distancing himself from Japanese style animation?
Well, he always has.
So maybe that's what set him apart. He's intentionally trying to distance himself from the lower budget films, or shows, and stylistically, he's doing that.
Yeah, I mean, he considers himself to be basically the only person in Japan doing this particular style of, I think he calls it something Eiga, but it's basically animated film as opposed to anime. So he has this particular approach, and so that hasn't helped. He also has said some negative things about otaku in general and about the anime industry, about being a very infantile industry, where it's just trying to satisfy people's desires for cute girls and simple plot lines and things along those lines.
I do like an idea of having a more in-depth story background, something with a little more depth in the writing side. I wonder, is Miyazaki merchandising as that following the same model as anime, the interplay between models, figurines and such.
Well, it's complicated, as is everything. The Miyazaki resisted resisted merchandising for a long time, and it wasn't until someone begged on bended knee to sell Totoro plushes. Actually, was the first thing, and they sold dramatically well. That he consented to that, and they've been able to merchandise very well. The problem is, it's the only way to make money off of, or the best way to make money off of an animated work is through merchandising. Ticket sales are all well and good, but they only happen once, basically. So Miyazaki's desire was that would be it. They would make a movie, they would do it off ticket sales, all well and good, and then he'd make more movies. The reality is that's not really how it works. So they've had to merchandise, and they've had to do things like the Ghibli Museum in Japan to keep money flowing in. As Miyazaki says, I have a lot of mouths to feed at Studio Ghibli. Salaries for all those people, to make all those movies, that's a lot of money. So Miyazaki's view is that he does not involve himself in that side of the business. He will approve products of somebody if the head of Ghibli comes to him and says, here are the things that we want to sell. Miyazaki will say yay or nay.
Bag of glass. No.
Right, exactly. It's a bag of glass.
Kids will love it.
So yeah, he definitely has a say in that thing, but he otherwise doesn't get involved. So and that gets to that issue that because he's distancing himself from the merchandising side of things, his vision is less commercial, which makes his stuff more unique, which is great. But it also means that he is similarly different from pretty much everyone else in anime, where they have to make it commercial so that they can keep their jobs.
So in the larger assessment, he's on the fringe of anime. He's definitely in the center of animation. He's not following either model completely.
Well, you bring up the idea of being in the center of animation. That's an interesting way of putting it, because that's a good question. Is he?
Is he? Well, the number of movies and that he's produced seem to put him there. When asked of, who's a producer of animated movies, that's the first name that really comes to my mind. Even though I'm sure there are other ones in the US.
And you're absolutely right. And yet he's on the outside. So it's this weird thing where he is absolutely central, and he's absolutely the first person on people's mind. But
to his own drum.
Doesn't want to be there. It's really weird. It's really, really tough. And that means that, as much as Fisher says in the chat room, they're wonderful pieces of art. No question there. But it's kind of like somebody saying, I'm going to introduce you to American food through Chipotle. Like, yes.
Is that North American or South American?
Right. Yes, that is a restaurant that started in America. In the Americas, and people in America eat that. But as a representation of American food,
how many Canadians out there feel that represents them?
Much less the fact that there is a well-established concept of American cuisine.
Hot dogs, hamburger. Wait, no, that was German, wasn't it?
Originally,
and the hot dog.
But chicken pot pie and all these various things.
Apple pie and mom. I don't eat mom. Eat the apple pie.
So he's in this weird spot, and yet Chipotle is, I think, now the most popular fast food restaurant next to McDonald's or something along those lines.
I eat there more than McDonald's.
Exactly.
It's great food.
That's one of the big ones. So it's this weird position that he's in. And I do have to wonder if that is holding back.
Is it harmful though to those who are new to anime, those who've seen his films and have seen anime, or those who just watch anime and kind of avoid his films? So what would you think it would be harmful in the sense of animation? They're works of art. They are, but harmful to the anime collective.
It certainly could be. I mean, certainly in the sense that he's setting up expectations that other people cannot fulfill.
And when he passes on the torch, how are they going to do that? That's again the next. His drum is a different beat than than the rest of anime.
Yeah. And it's a problem they've had at Ghibli for a long time. No one can step into those shoes. No one's like Hayao Miyazaki. I mean, it's just the reality of it.
Passing the torches. There were some mentions of other Miyazaki films that I think questioned about
The Wind Rises,
yes.
right? That was his most recent film.
So now that was released.
Yeah.
That was released. And after that,
that's the last.
That's the last.
Well, that's the last full-length feature film he's worked on. He's working on short films for the Ghibli Museum and other projects. So he's certainly still working. And as we said before, he's retired 7 times already. So it doesn't mean
that's got to be a record.
No.
Who else retires that often?
So don't completely count him out, but he's done a lot. And like Toshiro Suzuki, the head, has said, there does come a point where you're old enough that you just get tired. You're like, I don't want to keep on doing this. But the point is now, and folks in the chat room are asking about like Ni no Kuni, the video game that Ghibli made. They're trying to make these other things. And this is the other side of it, is that, again, they have a lot of mouths to feed. They've got to have other projects on the side that, and as far as I can tell, Miyazaki's fine with that because that's not his bailiwick. It's just like Grave of the Fireflies or any of the others.
I almost want to predict that when he does step down, there'll be more expansion into those areas, because I think his presence probably has people acting in a more reserved manner after his style and his method. But when he steps down, there'll be a new freedom for them to express any ideas that they thought, well, I'm going to keep this in my back pocket because I don't think he'd accept it. But once he's out, then it may be more acceptable.
And one of the problems with unfortunately, Miyazaki is a workaholic, so he's there all the time. So
what a boss!
Well, that's the thing. I wonder if
I wouldn't ask you to do anything more than I will do, but I will do everything.
That's the thing.
So it's going to be hard.
Exactly the problem. So I honestly suspect it's not until he passes away that they'll actually be willing to, move past and go beyond that. So that's another thing kind of holding them back, is that he has this constant presence there. And so kind of he's looking over everyone's shoulders, whether he's doing it intentionally or not. It's one of the tough things about being Miyazaki, is that he's not trying to do that. As far as he's concerned, he's there, he has his projects, but just being there,
just the presence,
is very intimidating to a lot of people, as you can understand. So it's tough for the folks there. And lest we forget, at least half of Ghibli's films were not made by Hayao Miyazaki. He only made about half of their films. So, he's fine with all the other stuff they're working on. Ghibli is not just his legacy. That's absolutely fine. But like you say, the question is where they go from here.
Do you think they'll go in a more anime-friendly direction? Possibly.
It really depends on how the market reacts to Miyazaki moving away from sort of active involvement.
Now Scott McCloud has a series of books about cartoons, and he describes some of the stylistic going from very conceptually abstract to very realistic looking styles. How do you view what Miyazaki's done to fit into the spectrum, and the spectrum that's coming up in the next, maybe 10, 15 years of anime? Do you think that it will move more in his direction? Do you think it'll move more in the anime style? Do you think they'll be emerging between US and Japanese, or will US animation become more stylized after Japanese anime?
Personally, I think the Japanese animation is only going to become more stylized, because the fandom is only becoming more intense and more focused in Japan. So there's no reason for it to become easier to understand. And that symbolism is increasingly popular, and folks are tuning into those more otaku-oriented shows like Kill la Kill and Haruhi Suzumiya and such, where you kind of, a lot of the jokes are based on understanding all of those tropes.
Self-referential.
Very much so.
Of the culture.
And Miyazaki's approach has always been not just idiosyncratic, he's the only one who's been able to succeed at that. So it's going to be hard for anyone else to come in and integrate that in and make that work for what they're doing, because other folks have tried. And there have been quite a few attempts to make Miyazaki style movies, these kind, soft, family films, if you will, and they have performed very badly at the box office. It's really hard. Folks in the chat room are asking for Lupin movies. Yeah, the only film he directed was Castle Cagliostro. That was the only Lupin the third film he directed. He did work on one of the compilation movies. Yes, one of the compilation movies, I believe, but I don't think he directed it. It was an assembly of various materials. But yeah, Castle Cagliostro was his, I believe, his only Lupin film. That was before Studio Ghibli was formed. Ghibli was formed just after Nausicaa, Nausicaa: The Valley of Wind, and then Nausicaa was kind of subsumed into Ghibli retroactively.
That was 1984 Nausicaa.
Exactly. 1984. There we are. So getting back to the larger point,
30 years later,
with Miyazaki no longer, as active in the industry, I wonder if that's going to be ultimately a positive, in that we're going to be seeing more of those more anime style works coming over to America, and he won't be the first thing on people's minds when they think of anime.
Well, with all the anime fans that have developed in the US, there are more people who are getting involved in writing their own doujinshi, their own doing their own artistic endeavors. Do you think that we'll see more demand and more artists entering the US animation studios that will have that stylistic approach?
That's a very interesting question. Part of the problem is that anime has such a low reputation in America for within animation circles that's
it's not art.
Tough. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Well, and the reputation of anime is that it's cheap and it looks bad. Even Miyazaki has a bad reputation amongst American animation fans. Because it is so uniform. There's very little depth or power to the animation.
Is that true criticism, or is that just snobbery?
I am unqualified to say. I mean, who's to say?
That makes me wonder.
But there's a lot of,
in contrast to which U.S. stylized animation is.
I mean,
what I always wonder.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of folks who I could quote you some things where folks are just very negative about his style. And again, it gets back to this idea that it's kind of this flat approach. So it's difficult. It's very, very different. So part of the problem is that in America, characters expressed through motion, through how the character moves. Miyazaki doesn't really do that. His characters don't. He has a naturalistic style. So characters behave in a physically appropriate way. When they fall down in a way that would be real.
Thud.
Right. But if he's animating 3 children all falling down, they will all tend to fall down in the same way.
Oh, so that's where.
Yeah. You look at Kiki's Delivery Service, for example, and you see how the characters interact. Kiki doesn't really walk or run or jump differently than any of the other kids in that movie.
So recycled motions.
Well, it's not really recycled motions. It's more that he's not thinking in terms of making each character have very distinctive,
the individual
movements. Yeah. And again, here's the thing. Walt Disney enshrined that as the way to make animation and the way to do things. I disagree that is the right way to do things all the time, because you get this weird overacting where the villain is strutting around in these weird ways and the main character is flowing around.
I've noticed a sort of a strange motion in a lot of Disney animation.
And that's the idea.
How is it being overly done? They're like, this is the if this was an actor, I'd say they were acting for the stage, where there's a lot of empty space and a lot of people need to see these over-exaggerated motions, where the actor for television doesn't have to overdo that because the screen captures them within a certain bound. So the smallest, subtlest movement is observable.
when you get a chance, rewatch Peter Pan for a great example of this, where Captain Hook is just overacting like crazy. It's really rather absurd, but according to American animation fans, that's correct. So that's part of the disconnect, is that we're looking for different things.
I'd lean towards more inclusive, that it's not necessarily a right way or a wrong way, but it has an effect and a style to it.
Exactly.
The right tool for the right job. And
yeah,
I wonder if there was a way of combining the two to have a more natural, enjoyable experience.
There are different approaches. Part of the problem is, getting back to the original question, is that anime is so aggressively stylized. It's so hard to integrate that into the American way of doing things, because it requires just a completely different mindset. So it's really hard for an American studio to say, okay, well, let's suddenly break out into this weird stylized animation. It's really tough. And now, as Liquidus points out in the chat room, we may be overestimating Miyazaki's reputation. A lot of folks you ask about anime, they talk about Naruto or Dragon Ball Z or Pokemon. They don't even really think about Miyazaki. So perhaps, he's just kind of out there. Who knows?
Could be.
Hard to say. But yeah, it's definitely this whole thing. And now Death Cannon asks in the chat room, why is American animation still so apprehensive about being more mature? And this gets back to our earlier point. It's not necessarily about being more mature. It's about having a different approach to animation and what it's supposed to do. American animation is in its own very specific ghetto, and just in very similarly to the way that Japanese animation is, where you're not, well, Disney tried. Remember Atlantis? Remember not Forbidden Planet. What was the Treasure Planet? Where they had this big swashbuckling PG-13 movie and no one turned up. Titan AE, same thing. Now, there were problems with those films, but no one's been able to really bust out of that sort of children's ghetto in American animation.
Well, here's the point. Here's another good point. Miyazaki and Disney together.
Right. Well, Disney animators love Miyazaki's movies. Absolutely. I mean, they claim that the reason Disney licensed and brought over Miyazaki's movies was because all the animators were so fed up with the fact that they weren't available in English that they threatened to riot. Basically,
So the decisions are more on an executive level than the artist level?
Very much so.
So maybe there's potential then for a merging of styles.
Possible. Now, but again, this gets back to that other thing. What do those Disney animators like? They're not campaigning for Evangelion, right? They're campaigning for that very smooth, very homogenous animation of Miyazaki, because that's what's more familiar to them. Is that, again, sort of Disney style animation. Miyazaki, ironically, is probably closer to Disney style animation than he is to television anime.
That seems that way.
Yeah. So that's kind of where Disney is trying to go. Master Chief Snake brings up in the chat room Little Nemo. Is a great example of where this is a film, Little Nemo in Slumberland, came out in '89, I believe, which was an American animated film that had involvement of basically everyone working in animation at the time ever in every country.
Wow.
Miyazaki worked on it. Rintaro worked on it. Tomino worked on it. The 9 Old Men from Disney worked on it. Ray Bradbury worked on it. It was
Ray Bradbury?
Yes, Ray Bradbury worked on it.
Wow.
And it failed. Nobody showed up to watch it.
Oh.
And it's this beautifully animated thing based on Winsor McKay's Little Nemo character from the 20s and 30s.
What was the name of this again?
Little Nemo in Slumberland.
In Slumberland.
Lovely film. I have it somewhere. I'll have to watch it at some point. And again, it was an attempt to make sort of a darker kids movie. The main character basically falls asleep and is in this sort of weird slumberland. And it was this neat idea, but it just didn't really go anywhere. Yeah.
Indicator.
Yeah. So it's really hard to do. Well, and Fisher points out in the chat room that oddly, Miyazaki is the one making Disney films now. When you look back at the
Yeah.
the kind of stuff Walt Disney was doing, Miyazaki's kind of taken over that that mantle.
Yeah, so he's almost the new Disney. So in that respect, yeah,
Absolutely. And let's give credit where credit is due. I mean, he makes some wonderfully powerful animation. Miyazaki does. It's very clear and crisp and visually stunning. We were watching Howl's Moving Castle the other day, and some of the imagery in that will just stick with you.
Beautiful.
It's amazing. And the other advantage he has, of course, is that Miyazaki comes from a Japanese perspective, an Eastern perspective. So he likes to be more symbolic in his films. So you have a wizard with all of these, who turns into this creature with all these feathers on it, which is just the kind of thing you wouldn't get in a Walt Disney film because he was a little more literal about story. So you have all these wonderful, weird things about what Totoro is like. There's just very distinctive to his films, and it's one of the reasons why it has such big appeal. It's hard to say.
Well, with anime taking different experimental directions, the potential for things to thrive or fall flat are coming up, and as technology is incorporating more 3D, and of course CG usage along with that, there's a lot of possibilities for what's being done. What do you see as the next possible nation entering into the animation field, as Japan has been a stronghold and the US has done a lot? There are other nations that have, but have any really penetrated the anime realm or animation market?
South Korea.
South Korea. Oh, okay. South Korea's really gotten a lot of stuff in that the US uses, outsourced to South Korea.
And they've made half a dozen really beautiful animated films. Well, they made more than that, but ones that I've seen that I'm like, yes, people should go watch these. There's quite a lot of interesting South Korean animation out there. Unfortunately, they have the same kind of problem that they make these beautiful films and then 5 people show up in the movie theaters.
Do they follow more of a Miyazaki style to that?
No, it's kind of all over the map. So there's Sky Blue or Wonderful Days, which is cyberpunk, sort of Ghost in the Shell-ish. There is Yogi the Five-Tailed Fox, which is very Miyazaki, nature, spirit sort of story. There's My Beautiful Girl Marie, which is an urban story with a fantastical element to it. This guy falls in love with this strange kind of girl who has a spirit aspect to her. Tekken King, no, not Tekken Concrete. Achi and Sipak, which is this really weird science fiction, almost post-apocalyptic Mad Max-ish thing. Very, very strange.
Kind of like that stuff.
And just all sorts of things like that. There's these just neat, odd films out there. And they just really haven't found a particular, approach. Hammer Boy, which we've both seen. So yeah, it really depends.
So,
and if not South Korea, Russia.
Russia, really?
Russia has always been the next strongest animated animation country after Japan and America.
They have had a very strong foundation in the early days of cinema.
Yeah.
And just unbelievable amounts of cinema.
There's been a lot of neat stuff coming out of Russia.
But we haven't seen it permeate the US as much. Do you think that trend will start to
I hope so.
Increase?
They've done some really neat stuff. If you want an interesting recent film, I apologize because it's the only the actual name of it is Kyukinzaza. That is just its title because it's a science fiction story, and that is actually a word in this weird language. And it's this science fiction sort of comedy film that came out a couple years ago. If you are looking for Russian animation, check. I believe it's on YouTube. A short film called The Hedgehog in the Fog, which is generally considered to be probably the best Russian short animated film ever made. I mean, it's certainly up there. It's one of their top works, made back in the 80s, I believe. It's cutout animation.
Oh wow,
paper cutout animation, gorgeous stuff. So yeah, Russia has always been very experimental and doing a lot of stuff with animation, thanks to what's their film?
Here's an interesting North Korean anime. Now, There was a panel that we attended where somebody went into North Korean animation, and it's pretty interesting.
There is
because they have a very different approach on life. They're secluded from pretty much everybody, and but somehow animation escaped the country. When people can't, the animation did. So it's not going to be subversive animation. It's probably going to be the official propaganda, but it's animation nonetheless, which is fascinating to watch, especially knowing some of the history.
And that's what's still left to be seen with North Korean animation, is if we're going to see any animation that is not government funded, that is not, advancing a specific political agenda, that could be really, really interesting. But it's kind of catch as catch can for those things coming out.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Miyazaki and peers.
He doesn't seem to respect his peers much at all, to be honest. Well, he doesn't hang out with them. Again, they're not part of his social group. He doesn't make anime. He doesn't work with them. That's a different industry. So he hangs out with filmmakers. He hangs out with musicians. He hangs out with Hideaki Anno because they work together. Well, they work and worked together. They work together on Nausicaa, and they work together on The Wind Rises. So they certainly hang out, but Miyazaki's kind of iconoclastic in that way. He doesn't work in the anime industry, so which doesn't help his reputation for a lot of people. It's tough.
It's funny. Carl mentioned The Last Airbender. My dad watched that series, and
nice.
I don't consider my dad a big fan of animation, but he liked it a lot.
Cool.
And it was a surprise when I came over to his house one day and I saw the entire Cowboy Bebop series on DVD. Wow. What are you doing with this, Dad? When did you get into this? But the appeal of a good story reaches beyond just the standard medium. Or genre. And I think that's one thing where Miyazaki really stands up. So sure. He has elements that point back to anime, but he stands on his own and he can transcend some of the confines of anime.
And this gets back to one of the fundamental issues, is that you're always going to have standout works. You're always going to have your Citizen Kanes. And your Casablancas. And the problem classically is that, folks watch Citizen Kane and like, well, great, show me more Citizen Kanes. We don't really have any more of those.
Spoiler, it's his sled. No.
So, people watch Cowboy Bebop and they want more Cowboy Bebop. They watch Spirited Away and they want more of that. And so you always have that issue that the standout works then become what people expect out of it, when by being standout, they're not average. They're not what you normally get. Which gets back to, it's not Miyazaki's fault. He's just making these things that people have responded to. It's the way it is. Yeah, and Avatar is a great example too of a show that has done a great job of introducing folks to anime, of being like that gateway.
Well, do you think we'll see more aimed at women?
More what aimed at women?
Of anime in general, but specifically stuff going to the US market.
Yes, because we already are. Because that's where otakudom is evolving. There are more women than ever in there. Most people at Comiket are female. Free is a great example of a show that just exploded and was hugely popular. Hitalia, huge female audience. So yes, that's absolutely going to be a big thing.
Now, is it the same exploding demographic in Japan? Women getting involved?
Okay. No. More accurately, there are otakudom in Japan is still dominated by men. Completely dominated, or massively dominated. But there are more and more women involved, and they tend to be involved in different ways than the traditional male otaku. But there are certainly more and more of them. In America, yes, women are starting to dominate conventions. There are usually more women than men at cons these days. So that is absolutely where it's where it's heading. It's unquestionable, and we're starting to see more and more shows. Well, the Fujiko Mine show from a year or two back, where they did Lupin show focusing on the female character with an all-female staff, and that's an indication that folks are aiming more towards that female demographic because they want strong female characters. Liquid gave us a quote about that Miyazaki had about Ghibli. He said, I think Studio Ghibli is like the Kremlin. The real one is long gone, but it's still sitting in the middle of the field. You know, it's like the military or political party, and for some it's a good order, but for some it's an intolerable fascism. However, it is certain that only by such mountains of tight control such movies can be made. You know, and that's the thing, is that they have this very specific style which requires this fascistic control over the production, and as a result you get this very specific thing, and this very consistent thing. When you're looser, people have more can bounce off, but then quality's not the same. How
long will it sit in this field before it turns back to the ground that it came from?
That's a good question. Everything passes away eventually. So, and it's another good point. I mean, it is very possible, I think we said this last week, that Studio Ghibli exists, more or less exists for Hayao Miyazaki. That, you know, he founded it with Suzuki and Takahata, and they have made other movies as a result, but that once Miyazaki finally, you know, completely moves on, intentionally or otherwise, that it's just going to fade away because really he was the life force behind it. And that for any number of reasons, that just, you know, it kind of lives and dies with him, so to speak. It's very possible that this was this unique thing and it just cannot be continued without him.
I hear the sounds of sirens.
Oh, the sounds of sirens.
So, Death Cannon has a question about Fujoshi.
Off topic, I think. That's not really a Miyazaki thing.
What is Fujoshi?
Let's not talk about that right now.
Okay. Something else. Maybe a different.
Yes, that does not really have anything to do with Hayao Miyazaki and his role in anime. In fact, I think we've been talking for about 50 minutes, so I think we've covered this topic very, very nicely. I want to thank you all very much for joining us.
Appreciate you joining us every Friday.
Exactly. So we're having a really good time discussing this, and we appreciate you joining us in the chat room to talk about all this.
Who knows? Maybe next Friday do we have an episode scheduled for next Friday, or are we going to be in town?
That is a very good question. So we do not have one scheduled for next Friday. We will still try to join you for an event. We're going to be out of town, but we will tentatively schedule for next week. Show up, and we will try to be here.
We'll give it our best college try.
Exactly. We'll have a topic that time. But then after that, in 2 weeks, we'll be certainly talking about the question of what elements of an anime make for a good long-running series.
Oh, a long-running series.
Right.
50 episodes or more?
Or more, exactly.
Or more, so yes. Several seasons.
Right. So there's really long-running shows. You know, when we've all seen the ones that just kind of start to drag on after a while. And they just kind of go, okay, here's more stuff.
This is a summary episode. This is the third summary episode in this series that I've seen, and I've only been watching a short time.
Or it goes off in weird directions, and suddenly we're off on these weird side tangents. So
what happened to the original story?
Exactly. So we'll be discussing that, and obviously understanding that anime comes from manga, so what kind of works.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Yeah, absolutely. That is the plan for 2 weeks. And again, in 1 week, we will attempt to be here, and we'll be talking about something or other based on what we see this week.
We'll see what happens.
Exactly.
It'll be a surprise to both you and me.
Thank you all very much. Take care. See you next week.
Take care.
Hopefully.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.